It's a warm welcome for Chad as he serves as the president of Praxis Mutual Funds, a leading faith-based family of mutual funds designed to help people and groups integrate their finances and their faith and values. Chad also serves as the senior vice president and chief investment officer of Everest Financial, a parent of Praxis Mutual Funds, where he has worked in various investment roles since 1999. He is a member of the Everest Senior Leadership Team. And with that, I welcome Chad.
Great. Thank you, Pete. I appreciate it. Let me get my presentation up here, but thanks for the warm welcome. And I too am grateful to be here. Thanks to the LPL-KA community group and to Pete for inviting me here today. Before I dive into the presentation, I thought I would share a little bit about my own faith journey, and perhaps that helps you to understand where Praxis comes from and the work that we do here. But when we get into the presentation, we'll share a little bit about how I and my colleagues have experienced this faith-based investing industry over the last 30 years and hopefully give you a little bit of insight into the work that we do that would be helpful to you. So again, I'd like to share a little bit about my own faith story so that you understand the tradition out of which Praxis was born some 30 years ago. I was raised in the Mennonite church in Eastern Pennsylvania. And like a lot of kids growing up in the church, I participated in every ministry and activity that my congregation offered through my childhood. I feel sorry for my mom. We lived 30 minutes from church, so she drove me back and forth just all the time, but it was for a great purpose. As I look back now, there were cultural elements that we experienced about how to express our faith and how to practice it. But I'm also grateful for the biblical grounding of these experiences. So what do I mean? When I was baptized as a 16-year-old on my own confession of faith, I joined a long tradition of people who've chosen believers' baptism. I chose to be baptized as a public expression of my desire to join God's work here on earth. And this choosing, as admittedly a very young adult at 16, this is at the center of Anabaptist theology, which took shape in the first part of the 16th century. Anabaptism, or rebaptism, as practiced by my forebears, was a threat to the state-authorized church of the day, which practiced infant baptism and therefore inherited church membership. I also joined a faith tradition that emphasized an orientation toward community, mutual sharing, and the idea that all we have is from God. And furthermore, that it's our divine responsibility to steward those resources that God has given us. Of course, these themes are not unique to Mennonites or the Mennonite faith tradition that I'm a part of, but they were emphasized where other traditions have chosen to emphasize other aspects of faithful living. So that's probably enough about me for now. I could go on for quite some time about my journey and Mennonites and Anabaptists, but I think we'll save that for another time. What I'd like to talk about for the rest of today is what we have learned from our experience in the faith-based investment industry. In the 1990s, it was a boom time for mutual funds and other registered investment company innovation. Markets were moving higher, buoyed by enthusiasm for the promise of the internet, and we also saw star active investment managers become household names in the financial press. Some of you who've been around that long will remember that. It was also the early days for the introduction of investment products specifically designed for faith-based investors, some of which were seeking to carry out their faith through their financial lives. And other than Pax World Fund, which had been founded by two United Methodist peace and justice workers, Praxis Mutual Funds was among the earliest faith-inspired fund companies. We launched our first two funds in January of 1994. And our good friends at the Timothy Plan also launched their first fund that same week. We have a fun teasing each other to try to describe which one of us was first, kind of like twins, who's the oldest. Before I get into the meat of the presentation, you've seen disclosures like this, so please understand that this is not an investment advice here. So you are part of the story as advisors who are working with your clients to integrate their values into investment portfolios. For us, the development of mutual funds was initially to serve the constituency of what was then known as Mennonite Mutual Aid, which is a fraternal benefits association that was founded to serve that particular faith group. Until that time, MMA had integrated its faith values into investment decisions that it made on behalf of church-related, not-for-profit institutional clients. And it was also how we managed money for a donor-advised charitable foundation that was offered to generous individuals in our faith tradition. And by offering mutual funds, we were able to serve the person in the pew in a way that had been out of reach for them up until that point. No longer was the ability to integrate faith into investment decisions only for the wealthy or institutions. Now, average folks like you and me could do it too. And of course, with public mutual funds, they were able to be purchased by anybody drawn to our philosophy and approach, which after 30 years brings us to today. While the concept of integrating one's religious beliefs into the marketplace has been around for hundreds or maybe even thousands of years, the explicit inclusion of these values into publicly available mutual funds was a relatively new concept 30 years ago. It was often expressed in those early days as the avoidance of companies whose products were seen as anathema to the Christian life. Companies that marketed products like alcohol, tobacco, and gambling were easy to identify and therefore to avoid. The expression of values and the ability to invest according to those values was an important element of faithful investing for many Christians. As the years unfolded, investors demanded more than simple avoidance from investments in companies that contradicted their understanding of faithful living. They increasingly desired a broader alignment of their values into all aspects of life. And of course, the terms used to describe what we do have changed over the years. The names for what we do have morphed under the influence of marketing and politics, and regrettably, sometimes even internal industry skirmishes over turf and terminology. But that's maybe enough history. So, what did we learn during these last 3 decades that remains relevant to us and to you, and I think to your clients? Let me offer 4 different lessons that we've learned. First one, performance matters, but we believe that consistent performance matters even more. It's the rare investor who doesn't care about performance. The advice you give your clients typically includes a conversation about their goals and objectives. Money and the growth of that money allows your clients to accomplish their goals, whatever they might be. So, of course, performance matters. Our learning is that while performance matters, it's consistent performance that matters more and allows you to retain them as your clients over the long run. You're likely aware of the phenomenon measured by Morningstar and others that many investors realize investment returns that are lower than the stated returns of the funds in which they invest. So why is that? Well, investors succumb to behavioral biases that cause them to move in and out of funds at all of the wrong time. They buy high and they sell low, exactly the opposite of what they should be doing. Often, funds with more volatile performance on the upside and ultimately on the downside attract investors who are particularly bad at timing their purchases and their redemptions. And on the contrary, it's our view that funds that are not as volatile relative to the expectations that people place on them don't surprise investors, and therefore it leads to less trading. The result is realized investor performance that's closer to the advertised performance of the funds in which they invest. This kind of investing isn't flashy, but it's effective. Again, performance matters, but consistency, we believe, matters even more. The second lesson is that zero tolerance screening sells, but it's often impractical. Let me tell you what I mean by that. Because negative screening is relatively easy for investment managers to do, as I described earlier, And individual company products and the stories that are told about those companies can create passionate viewpoints. Some investors and fund companies have placed a lot of emphasis on zero tolerance screening on certain factors. This can work if you have a few things that matter to you, but when extended to more than a few, it creates impractical portfolios. Often, when investors understand this, the trade-off between the things that they say they care about and ultimately performance, they back off on some of the negative screens that they initially told you are non-negotiable. Several online screening services allow the investor to filter out the factors they care for most. And this is fine, but it leads investors to think that they can find products that perfectly match their preferences. The expectations that these services encourage can also paint mutual fund companies like ours that are attempting to meet the needs of Christian investors as being unfaithful to the task, since they're not able to pass these zero tolerance tests that each unique set of investors have. And then lastly, zero tolerance investing suggests a veneer of purity that simply isn't reflective of modern life with its many complexities and compromises. An investor can avoid to choose one thing that offends them while participating in something else that only offends them just slightly less. We believe that integrating values and through screening is one important way to align your money with your beliefs. But might it be possible that our purchasing decisions are even more important than our investment decisions into living a faithful life? Third lesson is that there are real opportunities for impact in ways that just didn't exist when we began our work 30 years ago. Increasingly, investors want to do more than simply avoid companies. They desire to make a positive impact on the world informed by their faith. By making investment choices that do good while generating a return to fulfill their objectives, they become connected to the process in new ways. One such example is shareholder advocacy, or some also call it shareholder engagement. Advocating for people with limited power and stature has been a hallmark of many Christian movements over the ages. This sentiment moved into financial markets in a formal way with the founding of the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility, or ICCR, that, among other advocacy groups, is credited with creating pressure to end apartheid in South Africa some 30 years ago. The American Public Corporation has long rested on the foundation of an alliance between the management team tasked with running the company, the board whose duty it is to shareholders and other constituents, and the shareholders who actually own the company. The engagement of shareholders with management and board completes this partnership, and we believe can lead to changes in company policies and behavior that builds stronger companies. Of course, shareholder engagement isn't the only way to make an impact. This can be done by targeting investments in companies, whether through equities or bonds that have a positive purpose that the investor may want to support. This is particularly the case for us through our impact bond fund, where we have over a third of the portfolio invested in bonds that have a particular social or environmental purpose. Investing in vehicles that channel capital to community development entities, which each of our funds does, that serve the underserved, is another way to make an impact through these investments. A final way, although not the last, is proxy voting, which we all know is somewhat arcane and it's in the background of the investment world, but it allows one way for us to communicate with company management teams and boards about how we, as representatives of our shareholders, would like the company to be managed. And the fourth lesson is that we believe that generally people want to align their values with their investments. They're hungry for this work that we're doing together. And I should mention, since the name of your group is the KA community, that we credit the rise of Kingdom Advisors as one of the reasons why more and more people, both advisors and your clients, are choosing to integrate faith into their investments as we've become more mainstream. So the lesson we've learned is that a lot of people want to integrate their faith in their financial lives, but it needs to work for them financially. They have goals that effective investment management can help them accomplish. There have been critiques over the years of faith-based investing. Among them, you've likely heard them: poor performance or volatile performance that's been caused by narrow screening or narrow asset class focus, or high fees, to name a few. But fortunately, for today's investors wishing to do this work, there are many more options than there were 30 years ago. There are at least a half dozen fund families that are directly serving this market, offering a range of investment management strategies and approaches across asset classes and product types. While most of these firms address the market through mutual funds and separate accounts, you're likely aware that some have launched ETFs or private funds. Some are actively managed with higher expense ratios that come along with that strategy, while others, like Praxis, have developed index and quantitative strategies that charge lower expense ratios. So we believe that advisors like you who serve Christian investors wanting to extend their faith into their investment plans are well equipped to do so. At Praxis, we address the market with 5 different funds, 4 optimized equity index strategies, both US and international, and 1 core investment grade fixed income fund, the Impact Bond Fund. We invite you to learn more about these funds, and we'd be glad to share more about it. The Praxis Impact Bond Fund, as I mentioned earlier, is actually available through the LPL Model Wealth portfolios that are available to you. So in summary, these learnings have led us to approach the market by doing a couple of things. Our goal for you is to provide consistent performance, and that means that we leave behind the possibility of occasional stellar performance because we've chosen to use optimized index strategies. We found it beneficial to lower the cost of our funds to share more of the benefits of investors of investing with our shareholders and your clients. We have a broad sense of how we should integrate values through screening into our portfolios. And we think we focus on ways that we share, values that we share, rather than seeking elusive purity. And then lastly, we believe that stories of change are great motivators. Impact and advocacy stories connect people to their investment portfolios in ways that traditional portfolios just do not for most people. These are incredible ways for you to connect with your clients about the things that they care about most while you're developing investment portfolios for them. So if we have a call to action for you today, it's inviting you to ask your clients if you might engage them in this values question. Secondly, as I mentioned, you do have access to one of our funds through your model portfolios, and we're grateful for that. And then if you're interested in learning more, my colleague Josh Bean, who's listening into the call here today, you can see his contact information there, or you could find it on our website at praxismutualfunds.com. He would be happy to chat with you more. By helping our shareholders integrate their values and managing their money as stewards, and also making a positive real-world impact, we are happy to help you attract and we trust retain clients who want to join us on this journey. So again, I thank you for this opportunity to chat with you a little bit today. We are happy to engage you in a conversation if you have questions for me. And at this point, I think I will hand it back to Pete.
Yes, thank you so much, Chad. I really enjoyed your presentation today. And I remember my very first Keen Advisor conference that I went into that event hall, right, where all the participants are there. And I think I still have one of your little notebooks for taking notes in. It was a green notebook, and
Yeah.
I always looked at you guys as like the North Star, right? Because of your consistency, never giving up, and then obviously just the length of 30 years of doing this, that it speaks volumes to the call that we're all asked to participate in. And in these quarterly events that we do host, we want to equip our LPL advisors. We want to engage them and inform them. And from today's call, we also want to motivate them, right? So I really appreciate your details in one, your own little personal story, but also two, what Praxis is about and what Praxis is going to be about. And you are definitely, just to get on that MWP platform in that model is a great accomplishment. So we're so grateful for you as well. And I'm going to have Gary take it here and talk a little bit about our board opportunities, and then also to the very, very exciting August event we're going to have in San Diego.
All right. Thanks, Pete. And thank you, Chad. We'll be back with more. If you have a question for Chad, please email Pete at pete.lesnick@lpl.com, and then he'll pass the questions on to Chad. But in the meantime, I just wanted to share our microsite. Many of you are aware of our microsite. You get there just by going to LPL-KA.com, and then you put in the password, LPL, all small letters, and then you can click on upcoming events, and that's where I'm at right here. So we have some exciting things coming up. First, listed at the very top, of course, is our quarterly inspiration call, which had, but then at Focus in 2 weeks, or 2.5 weeks or so, we'll have three opportunities for our community to get together. The first one is the prayer breakfast. That's on Monday morning, the first Monday of the event, essentially, Monday, August 12th at 7 a.m. We will be in room 6F, and doors open about 6:45. There'll be breakfast available. Come grab your breakfast. We have worship with Adam Kappa, a recording artist, same person who led worship last year, and we'll have our event. The second thing we have is our open board meeting, and this is intentionally open to all everyone interested in learning more about the KA community, for LPL-KA community. That will still be on Monday, but over lunch. So grab your lunch, come to room 14B on the mezzanine, and join us for our open board meeting. We'll wrap up by about 12:45, so we're ready to go at 1 for the next series of sessions. And then finally, the following day on Tuesday at 1 in the afternoon, we have our advisor-led breakout session. And here we will have Rob West, of course, everyone knows him, the CEO of KA. He will be our moderator, and there'll be a panel of 3 advisors and talking about how to integrate these principles into our practices, as well as an update on the overall KA community at LPL. Speaking of that, as mentioned previously, the Praxis Community Bond Fund is available through MWP. As soon as I find it, there it is, right slide. And here it is right here. You can go into ClientWorks, type in Biblically Responsible Investing, or BRI, and you'll come to 2 portfolios. One is all equities and the other one is all bonds. So this is the Biblically Responsible Fixed Income Model. And if I just drop down a couple slides, here we go, you can see that for one of the positions, which actually is 40% of the bond model here, is in the Praxis Impact Bond Model. So we're very grateful for the work that Praxis does, and these funds, as you may know, are managed by our home office at LPL, the research team. They manage the funds, and our community helps guide that team as to what the restrictions are of which funds would be in our universe and which funds may not be in our universe. One question I would have, just before I turn it back over to you, Pete, if that's all right, is maybe Josh or Chad, if you could mention on that community impact bond fund, what are the things that you're looking at, and maybe share a story or two of
Sure.
the impact that that fund has made.
Do you want me to give it a shot, Josh?
Yes, Chad, go ahead.
Oh, sure. Yeah, thanks for the question. Praxis Impact Bond Fund is a core it's a core investment grade bond fund. So if you had one bond fund, you could use it that way. It's benchmarked to the Bloomberg Aggregate Bond Index. And as I mentioned earlier, roughly 30%, actually a little bit more, is invested in bonds that we consider having a purpose beyond just delivering returns. We do a range of things. One that I can think of historically is we have helped to fund vaccinations by the European development organizations in Africa. And so this would be an effort by developed countries to extend life-saving vaccinations in a place like Africa. And rather than doing this out of an operating budget over a 10-year period, they borrow money so they can do it all at once and save lives. So that's one that's historically been in the portfolio. It's not there anymore, I don't believe. Others are doing things right here in the country that might be funding solar installations by utilities. Increasingly, utilities will issue bonds that are for specific purposes. And while we might have invested in that company in the past, it's nice to know that we can buy a bond that's specifically for a project that we want to take part in. Those are two that come to the top of my head. I wish I had a few more on the top of my head, but I might think of some as I'm taking other questions.
And I do have a few here too, and I know too with clients, right? Sometimes they do like a little bit of a story, but sometimes too it's just more of relation. How can we relate with them? And so one of the questions that just came in is, what is a good question to start an advisor utilizing the initial discussion about faith-based investing? And I think it might have been on your last slide there that you had too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think as investment advisors, you're all trained to probe and to ask and build relationship with your clients. You try to understand their risk tolerances, their objectives. Maybe there's two spouses. You try to understand how they think about money differently. You know what you do, right? And it's intended to understand who your client is so you can serve them best. I think historically, investment advisors have been reticent to get into things that felt too personal. We know that money is pretty personal, but I think there's a hunger out there for clients to be known and to have investment advisors like yourselves, financial advisors like yourselves, to serve them in the holistic way that they come to your office. And so one way you might do that, that's, I think, very invitational, not judgmental at all. You might say something like, do you want me to take your faith or your values, if you know where they come from, into account when I'm creating an investment portfolio for you? If they say, nah, that's not important, or I'm generous, I just want to make money and then I'll be generous, that's not part of this relationship, that's okay. Then you've asked. But if you get someone to say, well, yeah, that's interesting to me, that opens a whole new conversation for you to have with them. And I would posit that if you do respond in a way that integrates their values into their investment portfolios, and you do it well, that you have created a more sticky relationship. You have a connection with them that if they go down the street to some other advisor, they may not find. And I think they probably will have experienced that somewhere else, that they didn't find it. And so that simple question, invitational question, do you want me to consider your faith or consider your values when I'm putting together an investment portfolio? The hard part, of course, is what was described just a moment ago about how you do that. Do you create a unique bespoke portfolio for that client? Or is there a model that's close enough? Or every mutual fund family that addresses this market has a different approach, and some might fit better than others. And so that part is difficult on the back end. But I think from a relationship perspective, you're engaging them in that very personal gut conversation is going to be really valuable.
Thank you, Chad. That's a great answer. And I use sometimes too along the side with that, with the language of, what's going to be required, not desired, right? What's just basically required to pull off our dreams, wishes, and goals. And
yeah,
because if you get sandwiched in the cost or the performance, there's always going to be something else out there faster, and why chase that, right? And that's not our job to be chasing things. Another question that just came through was a little personal, maybe for you as well as your firm, is, what was the biggest challenge that your fund family has faced in the last 30 years?
Sure. Yeah, interesting. You can see me kind of moving around in my chair here. As a startup, it's tough. We had years where we were really scraping for assets, and the events of 2008 and 9 were problems for everybody. And for us, we had just reached sort of a really good, sustainable level of assets, and then they were halved in a year, So that's a big one, and that's probably common to a lot of folks that were starting about the time we were. But I would say roughly in the middle of that 30-year period, we had just had a couple of situations with actively managed funds, both internally and ones that we had sub-advised, that we had good people working on them, what we thought were solid strategies. But I don't have to tell all of you that beating benchmarks, particularly in standard index areas like S&P or even small cap, is difficult to do year in and year out, decade in and decade out. And so we began sort of husbanding along some quantitative strategies, some optimized index strategies alongside of the funds. And we made the hard decision, even internally, to say, you know what, folks, we're not going to do this anymore. We're fighting too much with bad news and trying to compel people to buy these funds when they just didn't look that great. What can we do to bridge the gap to providing all of the things that we think make us unique? The engagement, the impact, the community investing, the screening, but take away, or at least remove the barrier of the variability of performance up and down relative to benchmarks that is inherent in active management. Some have been able to do it. I'm not saying that's not possible, but it's difficult. And we came to the point where we decided to abandon active management in equities and move to optimized index strategy, which just in a nutshell is, taking a public index that you'd be familiar with, screening out what we choose not to own, and then using quantitative system to create a portfolio that has the characteristics of that target benchmark and that minimizes the tracking error or variability relative to that benchmark, so that we're not making excuses about performance. Yes, there's ups and downs that are reflected by the market, but if we're within a percent or two of the benchmark any given year, after 10 years, that usually gets us in the top third of all funds in our categories. And that has played out really well. So out of that challenge came a strategy that we think serves us well and serves you and your clients well, for that first lesson that I gave you, that consistent performance really matters to people.
Yeah, that's great, Chad. And thanks for sharing, because sometimes everybody wants to know how the widget is built, right? As they want to know exactly, and would it really make a difference if they did, right? And that's why, we need to keep our clients focused on what's important. And, as you were speaking, I remember hearing recently about, where we go for all of our answers. It should be in scripture, right? That's where it's not going to be in the journal or on CNBC or any of the syndicated shows. And so, investing, that word, maybe investing in other areas, but there was no investing right in the Bible, but there was the word work, right? And so Another area I've shared with clients is, probably the best investment is your work, right? Let's focus on the abilities that God has given you and the desires of that. And then also to golden rule, right? Live on less than you've earned. And then let you guys do the rest. And we all know on this call too that the market's not here to make us rich. It's just here to inflation wasn't in the Bible either, right? But just as long as we can stay ahead of inflation and consistency, right? I love it that you guys are about consistency. We're in a great place. So I got one more question here that just came through. It's any thoughts on how faith-based investing may change over the next 30 years?
Yeah. Wow. There's always a crystal ball question, isn't there?
There is.
I think we're all experiencing some change in our careers, and we've been on a long trajectory here over the last, let's say, 2 decades of the rise of index funds and very cheap index funds from the likes of Vanguard and Schwab and others, State Street. So that may continue, although I think there'll still be people who want active management. Also, I mentioned earlier, what's pretty obvious is that people want other vehicles to accomplish the same kind of goals. And what I mean there is ETFs primarily. So some of those faith-based companies that I mentioned they were either ETFs first, or they've introduced ETFs into their mutual fund lineup. And so I suspect that that's going to continue. And that's just a broader trend that's happening in the market. Whether or not your firm or allows them, or philosophically, mutual funds are preferred, I think that's a train that's just going to keep going in that direction. I don't have any special insight into artificial intelligence or how that might fit into investing, but you might argue that all of the quantitative advances that have happened in investing over the last 10 years are artificial intelligence. They're different than what we think of in the popular way of AI and generative AI with ChatGPT and those kinds of things. But there's been learning models that have been used in investing for a long time. And so I suspect that we're going to see more and more of that. But I really like what you said there, Pete, about how you relate to clients. What they can control are their own behaviors, living within their means, hopefully aligning their financial goals with service to God, and that's what we can coach people on. We know that our brains are wired sometimes to make bad decisions, to eat donuts right before bed, or to sell low and buy high, those kinds of things. So that I don't think will change. Humans are humans, and we have those foibles. And so the other thing I would say is that there will always be a need, I believe, for human interaction in these kinds of conversations in ways that robo-advisors just can't do. I use a couple just so I understand what they're doing. And you get a little encouraging email if the market falls, but that's different than being able to call up Pete and say, I'm really nervous. What should I do? And then you helping them out.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Good. Well, I think Josh should be anticipating some good movements towards you. And I know another great place to connect with you guys is at the Kingdom Advisor Conference. And Gary mentioned it about our goal of our board is to really engage, equip, and introduce, but also to get any advisor who hasn't been to the conference, which is always typically the second week of February, right around Valentine's Day down in Orlando. And that's where you guys and always have had a great presence down there. So we're so grateful for your time today. And we'll look forward to seeing you again real soon.
Thank you. We'll see you in Florida, if nothing else. Yeah.
All right.
Great.
Thank you all for attending. And this will be recorded. So please do share it along the way. Have a great rest of your week. Thank you.
Thank you.